Dusty's discovery. The sun, a molten hammer, pounded Jedediah's back, sweat slicking his skin before evaporating into a ghostly salt. Miniature cyclones of dust spiraled across the barren expanse, taunting him with the promise of water. He peered into the shimmering distance, seeking the lost cattle, ornery beasts forever challenging the Bar's boundaries. "Dusty, get over here," Jed muttered, swiping at his forehead. Before their grazing in the Mexican Republic. At the sound of his name, Dusty, a collie mix with eyes like chips of turquoise, abandoned his investigation of a desiccated sage clump and sprang to Jed's side, tail a blur against his ribs. Jed swung onto Betsy, his dependable Appaloosa, and they began their search. Heat waves warped the horizon into an impressionistic painting. Jed's thoughts, as they often did these days, wandered to Sarah, his mail-order bride. The faded photograph painted her as a woman of gentle spirit, a soft smile playing on her lips, wheat-colored hair framing kind eyes. He craved companionship, a partner to witness the spectacle of the western sunsets and endure the solitude of its nights. He dreamt of a future beyond just himself, Betsy, and Dusty against this implacable land. The rhythmic cadence of hooves against the baked earth, the squeak of aged leather, and Dusty's occasional panting were the only sounds accompanying what stretched into an apparent eternity. Spotting a few stray yearlings near a bone-dry arroyo, Jed steered Betsy toward them. Abruptly, Dusty froze. His ears pricked, a low growl rumbling from his throat. Betsy halted at Jed's touch, instinct taking over. Dusty's growls were infrequent, reserved for genuine threats. "What is it, boy?" Jed inquired, hand drifting towards the Winchester secured to his saddle. Ignoring him, Dusty's gaze remained fixed on some unseen point. A sharp bark pierced the quiet, followed by another, his body vibrating with suppressed energy. Then he exploded into motion, disappearing into the heat-hazed distance. "Dusty, get back here," Jed yelled, but the dog was already a receding speck. After a moment's hesitation, he spurred Betsy forward, following the plume of dust marking Dusty's frantic path. He pushed Betsy harder than he should, the jarring terrain testing his endurance. Reaching the crest of a small rise, he finally understood Dusty's urgency. It wasn't cattle. The dog was circling something prone on the ground, his barks incessant. As Jed approached, the form resolved itself, a motionless figure in the sand. A woman. He kicked Betsy into a gallop, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Leaping from the saddle, he knelt beside her in the scalding sand. She appeared young, scarcely out of her teens. Her face, masked with dust, was ashen, her lips cracked like the dry earth. A simple blue dress, ripped and stained, clung to her frame. Jed gently pressed 2 fingers to her throat, finding a weak, fluttering pulse. "Dusty, fetch the canteen," he commanded, his voice strained. The dog, instantly understanding, raced back to Betsy and returned, the canteen held carefully in his mouth. Jed eased the woman's lips apart and trickled a few precious drops of water into her mouth. There was no response. He had to get her back to the ranch. To leave her here meant certain death. He gathered her into his arms, surprised by her almost ethereal weight. He carried her to Betsy and, with considerable effort, managed to hoist her onto the saddle. He climbed up behind, cradling her fragile form against his chest. "Easy, Betsy," he murmured, his voice a calming balm. "Easy, girl." He guided Betsy towards home, urging her into a slow, measured gait. The sun seemed to mock his efforts, its intensity increasing with each step. He glanced down at the woman cradled in his arms. Her face remained pale, her breathing shallow and uneven. He studied her features, the delicate line of her jaw, the graceful curve of her brow. And then he noticed it, a subtle detail that sent a jolt through him. He reached into his shirt pocket and retrieved the creased image of Sarah. He looked from a photo to the woman's face, then back again. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same gentle eyes, the same soft curve of her lips. Even under the grime, he could discern the faint gold of wheat-colored hair. Could it be? Was this Sarah? Had she become lost, somehow straying from her path? He fought back disbelief. It seemed an impossible coincidence. But as he studied her face again, a surge of hope bloomed within him. Perhaps fate, in its bewildering way, had intervened. Perhaps this was the answer to his unspoken prayers. He tightened his hold, his heart filled with a tumultuous mix of fear and anticipation. He had to get her back to the ranch. He had to keep her alive. And if she was Sarah, he would unravel the mystery of her presence in this desolate place. "Hold on, Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Hold on. I'm here." Dusty trotted alongside, his tail giving a tentative wag, as if sensing the profound shift within Jed. The sun blazed, the dust swirled, but Jed noticed nothing beyond the woman in his arms, the woman who held the potential to fulfill his lonely existence. A faint hope. The sun beat down on Jedediah's back like a blacksmith's hammer as he carried Sarah towards the ranch. Each step was a monumental effort, his muscles screaming in protest, but the thought of her lying helpless in the desert spurred him onward. Dusty trotted faithfully at his heels, occasionally glancing up at Jed with worried eyes, a low whine rumbling in his chest. The rhythmic thud of Jed's boots on the parched earth was the only sound besides his ragged breathing. He shielded Sarah's face from the relentless sun with his free hand, acutely aware of her fragile stillness. He tried not to think about what he'd do if he failed. He just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on getting her home. Finally, the familiar sight of the ranch house shimmered in the distance. Hope surged through him, a fragile bloom in the desolate landscape of his fear. He pushed himself harder, the image of his cool, shaded porch beckoning him forward. He reached the porch steps and, with a final burst of strength, heaved Sarah onto the worn wooden planks. He lowered her gently, his movements clumsy with exhaustion and worry. He knelt beside her, his heart pounding in his chest as he reached out to feel for a pulse. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "Hang on, Sarah," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "Just hang on." Inside the cool darkness of the house, Jed laid Sarah on his bed. The rough cotton sheets felt almost luxurious against her parched skin. He hurried to the well, drawing up a bucket of cool water. He dampened a clean cloth and gently began to wipe the dust and grime from her face. Beneath the dirt, her skin was pale and bruised. A gash on her forehead had crusted over with dried blood. Her lips were cracked and swollen. He cleaned the wound carefully, his touch feather-light. He found other injuries, scrapes on her arms and legs, a particularly nasty bruise blossoming on her ribs. Each mark was a testament to her ordeal, a silent scream of suffering. He dipped the cloth in the water again and gently moistened her lips. He coaxed a few drops of water between them, watching anxiously as she swallowed weakly. He repeated the process, a slow, painstaking effort to rehydrate her. "Come on, Sarah," he murmured, his voice a low plea. "Just a little more." After what felt like an eternity, her eyelids fluttered. Her eyes, a startling shade of blue even in their weakened state, flickered open, then closed again. "Sarah," Jed whispered, leaning closer. Her lips moved slightly, forming a single, almost inaudible word. "Water." Jed quickly brought the cup to her lips again, supporting her head as she drank a little more. He watched her carefully, his breath held tight in his chest. She stirred again, her eyes opening wider this time. She stared up at him, her gaze unfocused and confused. "Where?" she mumbled, her voice a mere thread. "You're safe now," Jed assured her, his voice soft. "You're at my ranch." Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by a wave of pain. She groaned softly, clutching at her side. "Easy, Sarah," Jed said, gently restraining her. "You've been hurt. Just rest now." He knew she needed a doctor, but the nearest one was a day's ride away. He'd have to do what he could for her himself. He knew enough about doctoring to hopefully keep her alive until he could get her real help. The thought of her succumbing to her injuries was unbearable. He covered her with a light blanket, shielding her from the chill of the evening air that was already beginning to seep into the room. He sat beside her, his gaze fixed on her face, watching for any sign of improvement, any indication that she would pull through. The faint rise and fall of her chest was the only reassurance he had, a fragile promise of life in the face of overwhelming odds. Dusty nudged his hand with his nose, offering silent comfort. Jed scratched behind his ears, grateful for the dog's unwavering presence. He wasn't alone in this. He had Dusty, and he had Sarah, and he would do everything in his power to save her. The woman with no memory. Sarah's eyelids flickered, assaulted by sunbeams that splintered through the cabin's roughly made ceiling. A groan slipped past her lips as she squeezed her eyes shut against the throbbing in her head, a dull ache that spread down her spine. Where is she? Cautiously, she risked opening her eyes again, letting them acclimatize to the gloom. The scene resolved itself gradually, a rudimentary log cabin, sparsely appointed. A sturdy table stood flush against one wall, bearing an odd assortment of items. A cracked cup, a well-worn book bound in leather, and what appeared to be dried herbs. A cheerful blaze danced in the hearth, painting the walls with shifting shadows. The sharp scent of wood smoke mingled with a medicinal tang. An attempt to send a javelin of pain through her side, arresting her movement. She gasped, fingers instinctively finding the bandages wound tight around her middle. What on earth had happened? Unease blossomed in her chest, morphing into full-blown panic. The place was utterly alien. She didn't recognize anything. Take it easy, a voice, gentle but firm, cut through her disorientation. Her head swiveled toward the sound. A man sat beside the bed, concern creasing his features. Ruggedly handsome, time had etched itself onto his face, yet his eyes held a kindness that belied his weathered appearance. A perpetual shadow of stubble graced his jaw. Familiar, yet elusive. "Where am I?" she rasped, her voice a dry whisper. His expression softened. "You're safe here at my place." Your place. Confusion knitted her brow. The very word felt foreign, divorced from meaning. Who are you?" He paused, then reached his rough, warm hand closing gently over hers. "I am Jedediah. Jedediah Walker." "Jedediah," she murmured, tasting the name. It sparked nothing. "And who am I?" The light in Jedediah's eyes dimmed, replaced by a fleeting emotion she couldn't quite name. Was it pity? Regret? He tightened his grasp. "You don't recall?" She shook her head, the motion a painful hammer blow inside her skull. I don't remember anything. Except my name. I think my name is Sarah. Just Sarah. One word, lost in the vast emptiness of her mind. Jedediah sighed, raking a hand through his already unruly hair. "Well, Sarah," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "You were in an accident. A serious one. You've been out for a while." An accident. Her eyes squeezed shut, straining for an image, a fragment, anything. But only a horrifying blankness greeted her. A terrifying void. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring her vision. I don't understand. What happened?" He squeezed her hand again, offering silent reassurance. "It's all right. Don't force it. The doctor said it might take time for your memory to return." "Doctor?" Her eyes widened slightly. "You got a doctor? I sent for him. He'll be back to looking on you soon." He paused, his gaze intense. "Just try to rest. You need to heal." Sarah's gaze swept the room once more, desperate for something recognizable, something to tether her to reality. But everything felt foreign. The crudely constructed walls, the meager furnishings, the unfamiliar air of the cabin. A waking dream, or perhaps a nightmare. "I'm scared," she breathed, barely louder than the crackling fire. Jedediah leaned closer, his voice a low murmur. "I know you are, but you're not alone. I'm here, Sarah. I'll look after you." The reassurance was hollow, failing to stem the rising tide of fear. She was utterly lost, adrift in a sea of bewilderment, stripped of her history, her bearings, her very identity. Only a name remained, Sarah, and the benevolence of a stranger. She looked at Jedediah, seeking answers in the depths of his eyes. Genuine concern seemed evident, yet something else lurked beneath the surface. A secret kept? A burn born? Why? She asked, her voice trembling. Why are you doing this? Jedediah hesitated, his gaze wavering for a split second. When he met her eyes again, a curious blend of hope and something unreadable flickered within them. Because, Sarah, he said softly, I think I know you. Healing and connection. The broth Jedediah offered tasted of campfire and a subtle, almost ethereal bloom, warming her hollow core. It was solace itself, a concrete kindness in a world suddenly strange. What is it? She croaked, her voice still rough-edged. Just some mountain herbs, he replied, his gaze unwavering. For healing. He left it at that, and Sarah, too weak to argue, let it pass. Days blurred, marked only by the sun's journey across the sky. Jedediah remained a steadfast presence, a silent sentinel. He dressed her injuries with a tenderness that contrasted with his weathered appearance. He fetched water from the well, provided thick, woolen blankets, and offered books brimming with fantastical narratives, escapades in distant lands, tender romances, and tales of mythical beasts. She devoured the stories, losing herself in the ink-stained pages, hoping to stir some recognition within their lines. As her strength returned, Sarah began to assist with chores around the cabin. Initially, she fumbled, her movements awkward and uncoordinated. But Jedediah was endlessly patient, guiding her with a quiet assurance and gentle instruction. He demonstrated how to collect eggs from the roost, how to work the butter churn, how to repair the fencing. Each small accomplishment felt like a victory hard won. One afternoon, struggling to cleave a stubborn piece of wood, the axe feeling like lead in her hands, Jedediah observed her for a moment before intervening, his larger hands enveloping hers on the handle. The angle is key, he murmured, his breath a warm whisper against her temple. He steered her through the swing, the axe splitting the wood with a satisfying crack. A shiver of something unfamiliar, a blend of gratitude and a nameless yearning, sparked as their bodies briefly connected. They shared meals at the rustic table, where Jedediah did most of the talking. Sarah had no history to recount, her past a clean slate. He reminisced about his childhood on the ranch, his family, the raw beauty of the countryside. She listened intently, trying to decipher the man before her, seeking clues in his choice of words and nuanced expressions. She noted the lines radiating from his eyes when he smiled, the hardened skin of his hands, testament to years of labor, and the way he consistently ensured she ate her fill before helping himself. She recognized a quiet power emanating from him, a fortitude that was both comforting and slightly daunting. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset ignite the sky in shades of apricot and violet, Jedediah remarked, "You have a gift with animals." Sarah looked up, surprised by the unexpected comment. "What do you mean?" "The horses," he clarified. "They're usually wary around strangers, yet they seem to trust you. Even Blue allows you to approach him." Blue, his loyal border collie, typically kept his distance from everyone except Jedediah. Sarah smiled, recalling the soft way she had stroked Blue's fur that morning. "I've always been drawn to animals," she confessed, a fleeting memory flickering at the edge of her awareness. A childhood filled with pets, a sense of belonging. Jedediah studied her, his gaze intense and probing. "You possess a gentle spirit, Sarah. It's refreshing." He glanced away, as if embarrassed by his own admission. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken feelings. Sarah felt an undeniable pull toward Jedediah, a connection based not only on gratitude, but also on budding affection. He was compassionate, tolerant, and fiercely protective. He had rescued her, in essence granting her a second chance at life. However, lingering questions haunted her. Why was he so unwilling to delve into her past? What secrets did he harbor? And why did she experience this peculiar familiarity with him? A sensation that nibbled at the fringes of her memory like a forgotten dream. Later, lying in bed, Sarah gazed up at the exposed beams of the ceiling. The wind roared outside, making the windows shudder. She drew the blankets tighter, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Jedediah's enigmatic words echoed in her mind. "I think I know you." What did he know? And was she prepared to confront the truth, whatever it might be? Delayed arrival. A vortex of grit danced as the stagecoach clawed its way into the yard. Jedediah, rooted to the porch swing beside Sarah, felt a knot tighten in his stomach at its arrival, an unwelcome premonition. Not this week. The swing's measured squeak seemed to mock the frantic drumbeat in his chest. Sarah, her curiosity piqued, leaned forward. "Visitors, Jedediah?" A faint crease appeared on her brow, a delicate question mark that increasingly captivated him. "Probably just passing through," he muttered, his words a flimsy shield against reality. The stagecoach rarely bothered with the ranch without purpose. With a shuddering groan, the conveyance ground to a halt, scattering chickens and unleashing a plume of rust-colored dust. The driver, a leathery man etched with sun and wind, swung down, cracking his spine with a relieved sigh. He fixed Jedediah with a squint, then rummaged in his saddlebag. "Jedediah Harding." His voice, raspy from the open road, carried across the yard. Jedediah nodded, rising from his swing with a sigh. Sarah remained seated, her gaze unwavering. He trudged toward the coach, each footfall heavier than the last. He accepted the letter, the paper fragile as parchment in his rough hand. "Says it's urgent," the driver added, punctuating the air with a stream of tobacco juice. "Came all the way from back east." A murmured thanks escaped Jedediah as he scanned the familiar penmanship on the envelope. The matrimonial agency. He tipped his hat and retreated to the porch, a prickle of foreboding crawling up his spine. "Is everything all right?" Sarah's voice, threaded with concern, reached him. He pasted on a smile. "Just business." He wouldn't burden her, not yet. Rejoining her, the letter felt like a stone in his grip. He hesitated, then broke the seal, his fingers fumbling. The message was clipped, its tidings stark and unwanted. "Regret to inform you of a postponement in Miss Eleanor Ainsworth's arrival due to unforeseen family complications. Revised arrival date to be determined. We apologize for any inconvenience. Eleanor Ainsworth." The name left a bitter residue on his tongue. He crushed the letter, his knuckles straining. Postponement. That was all. A mere postponement. But the word echoed, a cruel parody of the future he had envisioned, the life he had planned. He glanced at Sarah, who observed him with quiet intensity. The afternoon sun gilded the strands of gold in her hair, painting the soft curve of her cheek with light. Her eyes, the hue of a post-storm sky, held an unvarnished empathy that disarmed him. He had been so consumed with rescuing her, with safeguarding her fragile existence, that he hadn't truly contemplated the ramifications of her presence. He clung to the belief it was temporary, that her memories would surface, that she would eventually depart. But each day, the prospect of her leaving became more intolerable. A sharp, unexpected pang of guilt pierced him. He was betraying a promise, a commitment. Eleanor was meant to be his wife, his partner, the architect of their shared future. Yet, gazing at Sarah, he felt a connection that defied obligation and duty. It was an irresistible pull, a magnetic force that drew him, an emotion wholly new and unexpected. He was developing feelings for her, profound feelings, beyond anything he'd imagined. He surged to his feet, pacing the length of the porch. The planks groaned under his boots, a discordant rhythm to the turmoil within. "Jedediah, something's amiss," Sarah murmured, her voice slicing through his thoughts. "Tell me what troubles you." He ceased pacing, turning to face her. How could he articulate the mess he had created, the tapestry of evasions and half-truths he had woven? How could he reveal that the woman he awaited was not her, but another entirely? "It's nothing to concern yourself with," he said, his voice tight. He manufactured another smile, praying it appeared genuine. "Just ranch matters." He knew she saw through the charade. He detected the glimmer of doubt in her eyes, the subtle tensing of her jaw. He was alienating her, erecting a barrier between them, and the self-reproach was searing. He walked to the porch's edge, his gaze sweeping across the boundless prairie. The wind sighed through the grasses, carrying the perfume of sage and parched earth. He closed his eyes, striving for clarity to quell the inner storm. He knew he couldn't conceal the truth indefinitely. Eventually, she would uncover her identity, or rather, the identity she lacked. And when that revelation dawned, he feared losing her forever. But he remained paralyzed, unable to confess. Not yet. He needed more time to decipher his desires, his true desires. And deep within, he knew his deepest longing was for Sarah. Guilt and growing affection. The lingering fragrance of Sarah's lavender soap permeated the cabin, a subtle, constant echo of her being. Jedediah attacked a stubborn stain marring his saddle, the rhythmic squeak of the leather a poor substitute for the serenity he once knew. Ought he be envisioning Eleanor's arrival, sketching out their shared horizon, rather than wrestling with this insidious guilt, this burgeoning tenderness? He flung the rag aside, the saddle's surface gleaming faintly in the fading light. Dusty, his devoted healer, nudged his hand with a cool nose, emitting a soft rumble of concern. Jedediah scratched behind Dusty's ears, the familiar gesture offering scant comfort. "Easy there, boy," he rasped, his voice gravelly. "Just pondering." Dusty, ever attuned, cocked his head, his gaze holding an unnerving knowing. He seemed to intuit the tempest raging within Jedediah, the knotted conflict of duty and desire. Jedediah hoisted himself up. He needed escape from the cabin's confines, the pervasive lavender scent from Sarah herself. He needed to recall Eleanor's missives, the precise, elegant script, the promises of a stable life built upon practicality and respect. He saddled his horse, a restless current coursing through him. "Let's go, Dusty," he commanded as he mounted. The open range usually gifted him with tranquility, a bond to the earth that centered him. Today, the boundless vista felt like an extension of his own inner desolation. The wind lashed at his face, carrying the aromas of sage and parched grasses, yet he remained acutely aware of the lavender clinging to his coat, a spectral reminder of Sarah. He spurred his horse onward, the animal responding with a surge of power. He rode until his lungs burned and his muscles screamed, until the sun began its descent, daubing the heavens with fiery hues. Yet the guilt persisted, a leaden burden in his chest. As twilight descended, Jedediah turned back toward the cabin, a grudging resignation settling upon him. He couldn't outpace his emotions, regardless of his efforts. Nor could he disregard Sarah's need for him. He discovered her amidst the garden, tending to a small clutch of wildflowers she had nurtured into life. The waning sun cast elongated shadows, transforming her hair into a luminous aureole. He halted, observing her, an influx of affection washing over him. "Jedediah," she murmured, her voice gentle. She glanced up, her eyes meeting his own. "You're late returning." He dismounted, the familiar groan of the saddle leather a jarring counterpoint to the hushed intimacy of the moment. "Needed some space," he said, his tone carefully measured. She didn't pry, but he discerned a flicker of worry within her gaze. "Did you find what you sought?" He hesitated, caught between candor and deception. "Not quite," he confessed, his gaze falling earthward. She drew nearer, her hand reaching out to graze his arm. "Is something amiss?" The warmth of her touch sent a pulse through him. He recoiled, a sudden, almost brutal gesture. "Don't," he snapped, his voice edged with more sharpness than he intended. Her eyes widened, a flash of pain flitting across her expression. She retreated a step, her hand dropping to her side. I apologize," she faltered. "I didn't mean to." He cursed himself inwardly. He was inflicting pain upon her, driving her away, simply because he lacked command over his own affections. He reached out, his fingers lightly touching hers. "No," he amended, his voice softer now. "I'm the one who's sorry. It's not you. It's complicated." He couldn't reveal the truth to her. Not yet. The falsehood had become a bulwark, shielding him from the unpredictable repercussions of her regained memory. But the bulwark was fracturing, and he feared the ensuing devastation. Dusty, who had been observing them from the porch, emitted a low, mournful sound. Jedediah regarded the dog, seeing his own internal conflict mirrored in his faithful eyes. He knew he couldn't perpetuate this charade. He had to make a decision, and swiftly. But the mere thought of losing Sarah, of her vanishing from his existence, was a torment he couldn't bear to imagine. A familiar face. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air washed clean and smelling of damp earth. Jedediah watched Sarah humming as she stirred a pot of stew, the firelight dancing across her face. He knew he couldn't delay it any longer. The guilt was a stone in his gut, heavier each passing day. "Sarah," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She turned, a wooden spoon in her hand, her smile bright. "Yes, Jedediah." He reached into the pocket of his worn vest and pulled out the photograph, carefully unfolding it. The edges were brittle, the image faded and creased from years of being tucked away. It was Eleanor, or rather, a younger version of Eleanor, her face full of a hope that Jedediah knew had likely been extinguished long ago. He held out to her. This is someone I need to tell you about." Sarah took the photograph, her brow furrowing in curiosity. She ran a calloused finger over the surface, tracing the outline of Eleanor's face. The fire crackled, spitting a shower of sparks into the hearth. "She's very pretty," Sarah said softly. "Who is she?" Jedediah's throat tightened. He swallowed hard. "Her name is Eleanor. She was supposed to be my wife." He watched her face, searching for any flicker of recognition, any sign that the name meant something to her. There was nothing, only a polite, questioning gaze. "Was?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle. He nodded. "She's still alive. Back east." He hesitated, then plunged on. "I sent for her, through a mail-order bride catalog." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, absorbing the information. She continued to study the photograph, tilting it slightly in the light. "I found you before she arrived," Jedediah continued, the words tumbling out now, a dam finally breaking. "And because you didn't remember anything, I kept quiet." He braced himself for anger, for accusations, for the hurt he knew he deserved to inflict. But Sarah simply stared at the photograph, her expression unchanging. Then she gasped. It wasn't a dramatic gasp, but a sharp intake of breath, a sudden, almost painful sound. Her eyes widened, no longer filled with polite curiosity, but with a dawning horror. The photograph trembled in her hand. "That's," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's me." Jedediah's heart leaped in his throat. "What?" Sarah didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the faded image, her eyes darting back and forth, searching for something he couldn't see. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and shaken. Then it happened. A tremor ran through her body, a visible shudder that started in her shoulders and radiated outwards. She squeezed her eyes shut, her hand clenching so tightly around the photograph that the paper crinkled. "Sarah!" Jedediah reached for her, fear gripping him. She flinched away from his touch, her eyes still closed, her face contorted in pain. "No," she gasped. "Wait. I remember." Images flashed behind her eyelids, a kaleidoscope of fragmented memories. The crowded streets of a bustling city, the smell of ink and paper in a print shop, the hushed whispers of her family. Eleanor. Her name was Eleanor. She had answered an advertisement, a photograph, a letter, a promise of a new life in the West. She had packed her meager belongings, said goodbye to the only life she knew, and boarded a train. The train, the rocking motion, the endless miles of passing landscape. The sickness, the growing fear. Then nothing, just darkness. Until Jedediah. She opened her eyes, her gaze unfocused, seeing past him, seeing past the cabin, seeing a life she had forgotten. Tears streamed down her face. I am Eleanor," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm the bride." The photograph slipped from her trembling fingers and fluttered to the floor. She looked at Jedediah, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning realization of the enormity of his deception. "Why?" she asked, the question a raw, wounded cry. "Why didn't you tell me?" The truth revealed. Sarah recoiled, clutching the photograph, her hand trembling. A maelstrom of fragmented recollections and raw emotion churned within her. "It's me," she breathed, barely audible over the snapping fire. Jedediah's expression shifted from bewilderment to stark comprehension. "Sarah, what are you saying?" She retreated, the space widening between them feeling like a chasm. "My name isn't Sarah," she declared, the words feeling alien on her tongue. "It's Eleanor." The blood seemed to drain from Jedediah's face, leaving him ashen. He looked poleaxed, his solid frame suddenly vulnerable. He tried to speak, but his throat seemed to close. Eleanor pressed on, memories cascading over her like a breached levee. "I recall the train, leaving Boston, all those women, chasing dreams westward." A shiver traced her spine despite the cabin's warmth. Then, the stagecoach, the bone-jarring ride, the suffocating dust. And then, the ambush. A wave of sickness crested as the images sharpened. The masked figures, the sunlight glinting off drawn steel, rough hands seizing her few possessions. The remembered terror tightened its icy grip on her lungs. "They were highwaymen," she choked, her hand instinctively rising to her throat. "They stole everything. I fought back. I wouldn't relinquish the locket. It held my mother's image." She touched the faint indentation on her chest where the keepsake had rested. "They struck me hard. Darkness swallowed me." She fixed Jedediah with a gaze alight with dawning realization and residual fear. "I awoke to nothing. No identity, no past. Only you." Tears coursed down her cheeks, a deluge of grief and burgeoning hope. She had a name. She possessed a history. But it was inextricably entwined with this man, her rescuer, yet also a man who had perpetuated a deception. "I was traveling to meet you, Jedediah," she said, emotion thick in her tone. "I was Eleanor, your intended." Jedediah's gaze remained fixed, unblinking. His mind grappled with the chasm between the woman he'd cherished as Sarah and the phantom Eleanor he'd believed forever lost. He started toward her, then froze, hesitant to shatter the delicate truth suspended between them. "Eleanor," he whispered, the name a reverent murmur. He reached out a tentative hand, as if needing physical confirmation. "Is it truly you?" She nodded, tears still flowing. "It's me, Jedediah. I was waylaid by bandits, suffered from amnesia, and somehow ended up here." In 2 strides, he closed the gap, enveloping her in an embrace. He held her so tightly she could scarcely breathe, but found comfort rather than discomfort. She clung to him, burying her face in the crook of his neck, the familiar scent of leather and wood smoke anchoring her to reality. "I thought you were gone," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you forever." He drew back slightly, framing her face with his hands, his thumbs gently erasing the tracks of her tears. His eyes, usually pools of calm steadiness, now overflowed with a joy, a relief that seemed to physically unmoor him. "I don't comprehend," he confessed, his voice unsteady. How could I have been so blind to the truth?" Eleanor offered a tremulous smile. "You weren't blind, Jedediah. My past was a blank slate. I was Sarah. You rescued Sarah." He searched her eyes, his gaze intense, probing for any lingering deception. "But everything I recounted regarding Eleanor, the reasons behind summoning you westward." "I understand," she responded softly, covering his hand with her own. "And I comprehend. You mistook my identity. You made a grave error." A tentative smile graced his lips, authentic and reaching his eyes. He drew her close again, burying his face in her hair. "I'm unworthy of you, Eleanor," he murmured against her hair. "After everything, after the fabrication." She tilted her head back, looking up at him, her eyes a blend of love and absolution. "We all err, Jedediah." The defining factor lies in our actions thereafter. And you nurtured me. You sheltered me. You extended your love, even when believing I was someone else. His smile broadened, and he framed her face with his hands, gazing at her as if truly seeing her for the first time. I do love you, Eleanor, beyond the capacity of words, more than I ever believed possible. He lowered his head and kissed her, a tender, fervent kiss that validated the truth, a pledge of a future founded on transparency and reconciliation. The falsehood had dissipated, the truth revealed itself. And in that truth, they discovered each other, not as strangers thrown together by fate, but as two souls destined for one another, their love burnished in the crucible of hardship. A new beginning. Jedediah held her close, the remnants of the storm mirroring the tempest that had raged within them both. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, washing away the dust and grime, leaving a world reborn. He tightened his embrace, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of wildflowers that clung to her. Eleanor, he whispered, the name a prayer, a promise. She held him just as fiercely, her fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt. The fear that had gripped her heart only moments ago began to recede, replaced by a burgeoning sense of hope. A new beginning. It felt fragile, precious, like a newly hatched bird. Jedediah, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. It's me. It's really me. Dusty, sensing the shift in atmosphere, nudged Jedediah's leg, his tail wagging tentatively. He whined softly, his brown eyes filled with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Jedediah knelt, scratching behind the dog's ears. We're all right, boy, he reassured him. We're finally all right. Dusty licked his hand, then, as if understanding, let out a joyful bark and circled them, his tail ablur. The sun, breaking through the clouds, cast a golden glow across the ranch. The air was clean and fresh, the scent of damp earth filling their lungs. Jedediah took Eleanor's hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. Come on, he said, a smile gracing his lips. Let's go home. The walk back to the ranch house was silent, filled with an unspoken understanding. They passed the fields, the barn, the familiar landmarks that had once felt shrouded in deception, now bathed in the clear light of truth. As they approached the house, Eleanor paused, gazing at the porch swing where they had shared so many quiet moments. It's beautiful here, Jedediah, she said softly. More beautiful than I remembered. He squeezed her hand. It will be even more beautiful with you here, Eleanor. The days that followed were a balm to their wounded souls. They worked side by side on the ranch, mending fences, tending to the animals, each task a testament to their shared commitment. Jedediah taught her how to ride again, patiently guiding her as she rediscovered the joy of galloping across the open fields. Eleanor, in turn, helped him with the bookkeeping, her sharp mind and organizational skills bringing order to his haphazard system. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Eleanor turned to Jedediah. Thank you, she said, her eyes filled with gratitude. For everything. For saving me. For caring for me. Even when you thought I was someone else. Jedediah took her hand, his gaze unwavering. I should be thanking you, Eleanor. You've shown me what it truly means to love. And even though our beginning was built on a lie, I promise to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Dusty, as if on cue, rested his head on Eleanor's lap, his eyes closed, a contented sigh escaping his lips. He was the silent witness to their love, the loyal companion who had brought them together. The ranch became a sanctuary, a place where they could heal and rebuild. Eleanor rediscovered her love for the land, the animals, the simple rhythm of ranch life. She learned to bake bread, to can vegetables, to sew her own clothes, skills she had forgotten but now embraced with a newfound appreciation. Jedediah watched her, his heart swelling with pride and admiration. He had never met a woman as strong, as resilient, as full of grace. He knew that their journey wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges ahead, but he was confident that they could face anything together. One morning, as they were preparing breakfast, Jedediah paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Eleanor," he said, "I've been thinking. We should get married. Properly married this time." A smile bloomed on Eleanor's face, lighting up her eyes. "I thought you'd never ask," she teased. They planned a small ceremony, inviting their closest neighbors and friends. It was a simple affair, held in the meadow behind the ranch house, with Dusty as the ring bearer, a small velvet pillow tied to his collar. As they stood before the preacher, exchanging vows, Eleanor looked at Jedediah, her heart overflowing with love. This time, there were no secrets, no lies, only the promise of a future filled with honesty, trust, and unwavering devotion. This was their new beginning, a chance to build a life together, a life forged from the ashes of the past, a life blessed by love and loyalty. The sun shone brightly, warming their faces as they sealed their vows with a kiss. Dusty barked joyfully, circling them, his tail wagging furiously. The guests cheered, their voices echoing through the meadow. It was a perfect day, a perfect beginning. And as Jedediah looked at Eleanor, his wife, his love, his everything, he knew that he had finally found his forever.